Every school has that one kid, the quiet one in the back row, the one you barely notice until one day, they do something that changes everything. This is the story of a girl named Emma Rodriguez. To most of her classmates, she was invisible. But what nobody knew was that Emma carried a secret so extraordinary it would turn an ordinary Tuesday morning into a moment no one would ever forget. Picture this, it's a Tuesday morning in Portland, Oregon, and the hallways of Riverside Middle School are buzzing with that familiar energy you probably remember from your own school days. Kids are shuffling between classes, backpacks are hitting lockers, and somewhere in the mix of all that teenage chaos, there's a story about to unfold that will change everything. Now, I want you to imagine walking into the classroom. The fluorescent lights are casting that harsh glow we all know too well, and 25 seventh graders are reluctantly settling into their seats for what most of them consider the worst part of their day, math class. But here's the thing about stories like this one, they always start in the most ordinary places, with the most ordinary moments. In the back corner of that classroom, almost invisible if you weren't really looking, sat a 13-year-old girl named Emma Rodriguez. And when I say invisible, I mean she had turned disappearing into an art form. You know that kid, maybe you were that kid, who could somehow make themselves blend into the background so completely that teachers would sometimes forget they were even there. Emma had chosen her seat strategically. Back row, corner position, perfect for observing without being observed. She was the kind of student who submitted every assignment on time, maintained decent grades, and never, ever caused trouble. If you were to ask her classmates about her, most would probably pause for a moment and say something like, "Oh yeah, Emma. She's quiet, I guess." But here's what nobody knew, what nobody saw when they looked at this quiet girl in the back of the room. Emma Rodriguez had a secret. A beautiful, incredible secret that she carried with her every single day. While her classmates were doodling in their notebooks or passing notes when the teacher wasn't looking, Emma was filling the margins of her papers with something extraordinary. Advanced mathematical equations. Calculus problems that would challenge high school students. Complex algebraic expressions that she solved just for the pure joy of solving them. During lunch, while other kids were gathered around tables talking about their weekend plans or the latest drama, Emma could be found in the library. She'd discovered a section that most middle schoolers never ventured into, the advanced mathematics books. And there she was, day after day, quietly teaching herself concepts that were years beyond what she was supposed to know. Think about that for a moment. While her peers were struggling with basic algebra, Emma was exploring mathematical territories that most adults would find intimidating. But she did it in secret, like some kind of mathematical superhero hiding her powers from the world. Why? Well, that's the heartbreaking part of this story. Emma had convinced herself that nobody would care, that her passion for numbers and equations and the beautiful logic of mathematics was something weird, something that would make her even more of an outsider than she already felt. She found comfort in those numbers because, unlike the unpredictable world of middle school social dynamics, mathematics made sense. Every problem had a solution. Every equation followed logical rules. In a world where she often felt confused and overwhelmed by people, math was her safe harbor. Now, let me introduce you to the other major character in our story, Mrs. Patterson. At 4 to 5 years old, she was what you might call a veteran teacher. Nearly 2 decades of experience, and she had developed a reputation that preceded her into every classroom. Students would whisper about her in the hallways. Mrs. Patterson is so strict. She has no patience for slackers. Don't get on her bad side. And honestly, they weren't wrong. Mrs. Patterson believed in what she called tough love, the idea that students needed to be challenged, pushed, sometimes even made uncomfortable in order to reach their potential. Some students thrived under her approach. They rose to meet her high expectations and discovered they were capable of more than they'd ever imagined. But others found her classroom to be a source of stress and anxiety, a place where their confidence went to die. On this particular Tuesday morning, Mrs. Patterson was frustrated. More than frustrated, she was genuinely concerned about her students' progress. She'd been teaching the same unit on basic algebra for 3 weeks, and the results weren't good. Test scores were disappointing. Homework was sloppy. And when she looked out at her classroom, all she saw were glazed eyes and slouched shoulders. "This material," she announced, her voice cutting through the morning chatter like a knife, "represents fundamental concepts you'll encounter for the rest of your academic careers. Basic algebra isn't optional, it's essential." She punctuated her words by slapping a stack of poorly graded worksheets onto her desk. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent room like a gunshot. You could practically feel the collective wince from her students. Mrs. Patterson's eyes swept across the classroom with the precision of a searchlight. She was cataloging each student's level of attention, making mental notes about who was engaged and who was mentally checked out. Her gaze lingered disapprovingly on the usual suspects, the students who seemed more interested in everything except mathematics. And then, almost randomly, her eyes settled on Emma's corner. Now, here's where our story takes a turn that nobody, not Emma, not her classmates, not even Mrs. Patterson herself, could have predicted. "Miss Rodriguez," Mrs. Patterson called out, her voice carrying the full weight of her authority and expectation. Emma's stomach dropped. In all her careful planning, all her strategic invisibility, she had never prepared for this moment. The sudden attention hit her like a physical force. Every eye in the classroom turned toward her like spotlights, and she felt exposed in a way she had never experienced before. "You've been remarkably quiet this morning," Mrs. Patterson continued, her voice carrying what could only be described as a challenge. "Perhaps you'd like to demonstrate your understanding of the material we've been covering." Emma's cheeks flushed red. She managed to whisper, "Yes, but inside, her mind was racing, calculating escape routes and wishing desperately that she could just disappear entirely. But Mrs. Patterson wasn't done. Oh no, she was just getting started. She walked to the whiteboard with determined strides, her marker squeaking against the surface as she began to create what could only be described as a mathematical monster. The equation she wrote sprawled across the board in intimidating complexity, a labyrinth of variables, exponents, and operations that looked like it belonged in a college classroom, not a 7th grade math lesson. Gasps rippled through the room. Students exchanged wide-eyed glances. This wasn't basic algebra. This was something from another planet entirely. "Solve it," Mrs. Patterson commanded, turning back to Emma with raised eyebrows and crossed arms. The silence that followed was electric. You could have heard a pin drop in that classroom. Emma remained frozen in her seat as the weight of 25 pairs of eyes pressed down on her. Her classmates' whispers were barely audible, but she caught every word. "No way she can figure that out. What even is that equation? I don't even know where to start." Several students couldn't suppress their nervous laughter. After all, if they were in Emma's position, they'd be completely lost. This had to be some kind of cruel joke, right? Mrs. Patterson was probably trying to make a point about paying attention in class. "Any time now, Miss Rodriguez," Mrs. Patterson said, her tone dripping with impatience and barely concealed skepticism. "Or perhaps you need a calculator for this basic work." The sarcasm in her voice drew another round of nervous chuckles from the class. This was it. This was the moment where Emma would be humiliated in front of everyone, where her carefully constructed invisibility would be shattered not by her own choice, but by a teacher who wanted to make an example out of her. But something was happening inside Emma's mind. Something that had nothing to do with panic or fear. As her eyes focused on that complex equation sprawled across the whiteboard, her brain began to do what it had been trained to do through years of secret study and private challenge. She was parsing the equation, breaking it down into manageable components, seeing patterns and relationships that were invisible to everyone else in that room. Emma gripped her pencil with white knuckles, but for the first time since Mrs. Patterson had called her name, she wasn't thinking about escape routes or wishing she could disappear. She was thinking about mathematics. And slowly, very slowly, Emma Rodriguez began to stand up. Her chair scraped against the floor with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. But she was moving forward, one step at a time, toward the front of the classroom, toward that intimidating whiteboard, toward a moment that would change everything. This wasn't bravado driving her forward. This wasn't some sudden burst of confidence. This was something deeper, something that had been building inside her through all those lonely lunch periods in the library, all those nights spent filling notebook margins with equations, all those moments when she had chosen to hide her light under a bushel. This was Emma Rodriguez finally deciding to step out of the shadows. As she walked toward the front of the classroom, accepting the marker from Mrs. Patterson's outstretched hand, Emma realized that she was standing at a crossroads. She could retreat back into her familiar invisibility, mumble some excuse about not knowing the answer, and let this moment pass. Or she could do something that terrified her more than anything else in the world. She could let them see who she really was. The marker felt cold in her palm as she stood before that whiteboard, the complex equation looming above her like a mathematical mountain waiting to be climbed. Behind her, 25 of her classmates held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. And Emma Rodriguez, the invisible girl with the secret gift, raised that marker and prepared to show the world what she could do. The room held its collective breath as Emma stood before that whiteboard, marker in hand, staring up at what looked like an impossible puzzle. But here's the thing about Emma Rodriguez that nobody in that classroom understood yet. She didn't see an impossible equation. She saw a beautiful challenge. Her eyes moved across those symbols and numbers with the systematic precision of someone reading their favorite book. While her classmates saw chaos, Emma saw patterns. While they saw complexity, she saw logical steps waiting to be taken. This was her language, her world, and for the first time in her school life, she was about to speak it fluently in front of everyone. Emma raised the marker and began to write. At first, her initial marks seemed random to the watching students. Isolated symbols and numbers that appeared to have no connection to anything coherent. You could almost hear the collective thought running through the room. She has no idea what she's doing. But then something magical started to happen. As Emma continued working, a method began emerging from what had initially looked like chaos. She wasn't just randomly scribbling numbers on the board. She was carefully, methodically breaking down this mathematical monster into smaller, manageable pieces. Think about watching a master chef prepare a complex dish. At first, all you see are ingredients scattered across the counter, seemingly random cuts and preparations. But gradually, you begin to understand that every move is deliberate, every step is building towards something greater. That's exactly what was happening as Emma worked. She isolated variables with the precision of a surgeon. She simplified complex expressions with moves that demonstrated not just knowledge, but genuine mathematical insight. Each step flowed logically from the previous one, building toward a solution with the inevitability of a perfectly constructed argument. And Mrs. Patterson, her confident smirk was beginning to fade. She moved closer to the board, her arms unfolding as she found herself genuinely engaged with Emma's problem-solving process. This wasn't what she had expected. Not at all. She had anticipated embarrassment, maybe a teachable moment about the importance of paying attention in class. What she was witnessing instead was mathematical thinking at a level she hadn't seen from any of her students. The whispers and nervous laughter in the classroom had completely disappeared. Emma's classmates found themselves genuinely captivated by what was unfolding before them. They couldn't follow every step of her work. Honestly, most of them couldn't follow any of it, but they could sense they were witnessing something extraordinary. There was something almost hypnotic about watching Emma work. She had entered what psychologists call a state of flow, where the external world seemed to recede and she existed purely in the moment, purely in the problem. The classroom, the staring faces, even Mrs. Patterson's intimidating presence, all of it became background noise as Emma navigated through that mathematical landscape with the confidence of someone in their natural element. Her years of private study had prepared her for exactly this kind of challenge, though she had never imagined applying her skills in such a public setting. All those lunch periods in the library, all those nights spent exploring advanced concepts while her classmates were watching TV or playing video games, it had all led to this moment. As she approached the final stages of the solution, Emma paused. Not from uncertainty, from the careful precision of someone who understands that in mathematics, one small error can topple everything that came before. She retraced several steps, verified her calculations with the methodical attention of a true mathematician. And then, with a series of decisive strokes, she completed the solution. When Emma finally stepped back from that whiteboard, the entire board was covered with her work. What had started as an intimidating chaos of symbols had been transformed into elegant mathematical order. She turned to face the classroom, her hands dusty with marker residue, her expression calm despite the rapid beating of her heart. The silence that followed was unlike anything that classroom had ever experienced. Mrs. Patterson stood motionless, her eyes darting across Emma's work as she traced each step of the solution. She moved her finger along the lines of calculations, occasionally pausing to verify particularly complex transitions. You could almost see her mind working, checking and double-checking, searching for errors that simply weren't there. And then the revelation hit Mrs. Patterson like a physical force. She had dramatically, embarrassingly underestimated one of her students. The quiet girl she had barely noticed, the one she had singled out almost randomly, had just demonstrated mathematical understanding that exceeded many high school students. How? Mrs. Patterson finally managed, her voice softer and more vulnerable than anyone had ever heard it. She caught herself, shaking her head as if trying to process the cognitive dissonance between her expectations and reality. How did you know to approach it that way? Emma shifted uncomfortably under the continued scrutiny. The spotlight still felt foreign and overwhelming, but she was also experiencing something completely new, a flicker of genuine pride in her accomplishment. "I've been studying," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. It made sense once I broke it down into parts. "Studying?" Mrs. Patterson pressed, disbelief still coloring her tone. "On your own? Beyond what we cover in class?" Emma nodded simply. "I like math." Those three simple words, "I like math," sent ripples of surprise through the classroom like a stone dropped into still water. Students exchanged glances and whispered behind cupped hands. The revelation that their invisible classmate harbored such extraordinary capability challenged everything they thought they knew about intelligence, talent, and the nature of their peer group. Mrs. Patterson gathered her composure and turned to address the class. Her voice carried a weight and respect that hadn't been there moments before. "Class, I want you to understand what just happened here. Emma didn't just solve this problem, she approached it with mathematical thinking that demonstrates understanding far beyond grade-level expectations." Her words carried genuine awe and professional recognition. This is what mathematical talent looks like when it's properly developed and applied. Emma's cheeks burned with the unfamiliar heat of positive attention. She had spent so long avoiding any kind of spotlight that being celebrated felt almost surreal. She glanced toward her usual seat in the back corner, longing for its familiar safety, but something fundamental had shifted within her. For the first time in her life, she felt genuine pride, not because she had proven Mrs. Patterson wrong, but because she had proven something important to herself. The applause started tentatively. A few students in the back began clapping slowly, unsure if this was the appropriate response. But it built into something stronger, more sustained, more real. Emma looked out at her classmates, these peers who had barely noticed her existence an hour ago, and allowed herself a small but genuine smile. She hadn't just solved an equation. She had fundamentally altered the dynamic of the entire classroom and changed how others saw her. More importantly, she was beginning to change how she saw herself. Mrs. Patterson raised her hand to quiet the applause, her expression thoughtful and, if we're being honest, somewhat chastened. "Emma," she said, her voice carrying newfound respect, "I have to ask, why haven't you shown this kind of capability before? If you can work at this level, why have you kept it hidden?" The question hung in the air, touching on something deeper than mathematical ability. Emma struggled to articulate the complex emotions and social fears that had kept her talents buried for so long. "I didn't think anyone would care," she finally said, the words barely audible but carrying profound weight. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened completely, revealing the caring educator beneath her demanding exterior. "Well," she said after a thoughtful pause, "you were wrong about that." As the bell rang and students began their usual rush toward the door, Mrs. Patterson called out over the noise, "Emma, could you stay for a moment?" The request sent another wave of whispers through the departing students, but Emma remained in her seat as the classroom emptied. Mrs. Patterson approached her with a gentleness that seemed completely at odds with her usual commanding presence. "I owe you an apology," Mrs. Patterson began, her tone carrying uncommon vulnerability. An apology from Mrs. Patterson was unprecedented. Emma blinked in surprise. "I underestimated you completely," she continued. "I made assumptions about your capabilities that were entirely wrong. You have extraordinary mathematical talent, and I'm sorry I didn't recognize it sooner." The words carried weight that extended far beyond a simple classroom interaction. Emma had never experienced this kind of recognition from an adult authority figure, and the validation felt both overwhelming and deeply meaningful. "You have a gift, Emma," Mrs. Patterson continued, her voice gaining strength and conviction. "And it's not just about solving equations. It's about how you think, how you approach complex problems, how you see patterns and relationships. That's something genuinely rare." I didn't think it mattered to anyone else," Emma said, her fingers tracing the familiar edges of her notebook. "It matters enormously," Mrs. Patterson replied firmly. "And I want to help you develop it further, if you're interested. There are mathematics competitions, advanced programs, summer opportunities that could really challenge you and help you grow. I think you could excel in ways that might surprise even you." The prospect was terrifying, but Emma also felt a thrill of possibility she had never experienced before. She looked up at Mrs. Patterson, seeing not the intimidating authority figure she had feared, but someone who genuinely believed in her potential. "I'll think about it," Emma said quietly, allowing herself a small smile. "That's all I ask," Mrs. Patterson smiled back warmly. "But Emma, promise me something, don't hide this gift anymore. The world needs people who can think the way you do." As Emma left that classroom, her notebook pressed against her chest. She felt like she was walking through a completely different world than the one she had entered that morning. The hallway looked the same, the lockers and bulletin boards were unchanged, but everything felt charged with new possibility. Throughout the rest of the day, her classmates' reactions ranged from curiosity to genuine admiration. Some approached her shyly during lunch, asking how she had learned to solve such complex problems. Others simply offered congratulations or expressed amazement at what they had witnessed. The attention was still uncomfortable. Emma wasn't magically transformed into an extrovert, but she was beginning to realize that being seen wasn't as terrifying as she had always imagined. That evening, Emma sat at her family's kitchen table, hesitating before sharing the day's events with her parents. When she finally told them about the challenge, the equation, and the response from both her teacher and classmates, the pride on their faces was unmistakable. "You've always been capable of amazing things," her mother said, squeezing her hand with warm affection. "I'm so glad others are finally seeing what we've always known." Her father nodded enthusiastically. "This is just the beginning, Emma. Don't ever be afraid to show the world what you can do." That night, Emma opened her notebook to a fresh page. But instead of immediately diving into mathematical problems, she paused to consider the broader implications of the day's events. The blank page no longer represented a space for secrets and private exploration. It had become a canvas for public possibility and future achievement. She began writing, not just equations and calculations, but goals and dreams. What if she did enter those competitions Mrs. Patterson had mentioned? What if she pursued advanced mathematics programs? What if she allowed herself to imagine a future where her talents were not just recognized but celebrated and developed? The thoughts both scared and excited her, but Emma knew with absolute certainty that she couldn't return to her old pattern of hiding. The genie was out of the bottle, and Emma Rodriguez was ready to discover just how far her mathematical journey might take her. You know what makes Emma's story so powerful? It's not really about mathematics at all. It's about something much more universal, something that touches every single one of us. How many of us have hidden parts of ourselves because we were afraid of what others might think? How many of us have convinced ourselves that our passions, our talents, our unique gifts don't matter to anyone else? How many times have we chosen invisibility over the risk of being truly seen? Emma's transformation from invisible student to recognized talent represents something we all carry within us, untapped potential waiting for the right moment to emerge. Her story challenges us to look more carefully at the people around us, to recognize that brilliance doesn't always announce itself loudly, and that sometimes the quietest voices have the most profound things to say. For those of you watching who might see yourselves in Emma's initial invisibility, her story offers a powerful message. Your unique talents have value. The fear of being seen, while completely understandable, might be the very thing preventing you from discovering just how much you're capable of achieving. So here's my question for you. What's your hidden talent? What's that thing you've been keeping to yourself, afraid to show the world? Maybe it's time to grab your own metaphorical marker and step up to the whiteboard of your life. Because here's what Emma's story teaches us. Sometimes all it takes is one moment of courage to change everything. One decision to step forward instead of hiding back. One choice to let the world see who you really are. Your potential is limitless. The question is, are you ready to show the world what you can do?